Hey, so we're here with David Mellis, and David has been doing a lot of the implementation of the technology behind the WOVNS platform. And in the previous tutorial, we spoke with Bonnie Guo about using processing to generate designs. And we invited David to break down some of the concepts behind using code to generate your own designs. So take it away.
Yeah, so I'm gonna show you a little bit about how to use processing to create cool patterns like this. And you can find all of the code that I'm going to talk about on the WOVNS website in the tutorial section. So if you don't catch anything, you can always go back and get more information there. So here's processing. I have the WOVNS examples open over here. And here I have the random grid example. And you'll note that if I run the random grid example, I'm going to end up with something very much like Bonnie's pattern. Right? So we've got some circles, some lines, etc. So how does that work? Well, let's look at the code. There are two main portions of this code. There is this part where we kind of set up our canvas and our color palettes, and then there is the main portion down here where we're actually drawing the design. So let's dive in to the first command, which is the size command or the size function. And we're telling processing that we want a canvas whose size is 3984 pixels wide and 3000 pixels high. And you might remember this is the dimensions of the tall quality. So it's about 46 inches wide and about 36 inches or 1 yard tall. The next line sets the background color. And so we give it a color that we found on the WOVNS qualities and color palettes page. So here we're using textured, which is 020100. And so we've just pasted that into the background command, and that will give us a nice black background. The next line, no smooth, tells processing not to smooth out colors at the edges of shapes, so really only use the colors that we explicitly call for. And that's important for weaving because those are the colors that correspond to the right weaves. The next few lines are setting the stroke and the fill of the shapes that we're going to draw. So when you draw a shape, you have the outline, that's the stroke. So in this case we have a red stroke, like in Bonnie's design, and the stroke weight is 15 pixels, so we get these nice fat lines. And then there is the fill, which fills in the shape.
So does Bonnie's design have a black fill?
Actually, in this case, there's no fill, and instead what's happening is the background color, which is black, is showing through.
Oh, I see. Cool.
And so that's basically the setup of the canvas and the color palettes that we're going to use in the design. Okay. Now let's look at the next portion of the code. This is the part that's actually going to draw the design. And as the name random grid suggests, we're going to create a grid. So a grid of multiple cells and rows and columns. And then for each cell in that grid, we're going to draw a random shape. And so the way that works is first we have this variable called m, which is going to store a value 84, which is the size of our grid. So 84 is the dots per inch of the tall quality. And so we're saying create a grid with a cell that is 1 inch or 84 pixels wide and 1 inch or 84 pixels high. Then we have a loop that is going to loop us through each row of the grid. So each of the y coordinates of the grid. Then within each row, we have to loop through each column. So x is going to go from 0 to the right edge of the screen. So from the left to the right edge of the screen. These loops are taking us through each cell of the grid. So we have our grid. And we start with x and y both equal to 0 in the upper left-hand corner, because that's where computers start. X goes to the right like that. Y goes down like that. And each time through the first or outer loop, we add 84 to y, which takes us 1 inch down the canvas each time. And then for each pass through that loop, we go through the inner loop, which adds 84 to x. So each time through that second or inner loop, we add 84 to x, going 1 inch to the right. So basically the outer loop takes us through each row of the grid, and then the inner loop takes us through each cell in that row.
Gotcha.
And then for each cell in the grid, we're going to pick a random number, one of 9 random numbers. It's actually going to give us a number between 0 and 8. We store that in the variable j. And then what we do is we say, well, what random number do we get? We say if our random number is 1, then we want to draw an ellipse. So first, what's an ellipse? An ellipse is just kind of a generalized circle where the width and the height can be different, potentially. And what do we need to know to draw an ellipse? Well, we need to know 4 things. We need to know the center of the ellipse, we need to know its width, and we need to know its height. And that allows us to draw the ellipse. So in this case, we're drawing the ellipse inside of our grid cell. And x and y is at the upper left-hand corner of our grid cell, right there. So we want the center of our ellipse to be the center of our grid cell. So we go halfway over, or half of m, because m is the width of our cell. So that takes us to here, x plus half of m, 0.5 m. And then we go down by half of m. So that takes us to y plus 0.5 m. That's the center. The width is m, and the height is m. So it's 84 pixels or 1 inch high, 84 pixels or 1 inch wide. So this line is going to draw an ellipse if we pick the random number 1. But what if we picked a different random number, say 2? Well, in that case, we're going to draw 2 lines. And the line command is similar to the ellipse command. It takes 4 arguments. In this case, though, those arguments are the x and y coordinate here, the x and y coordinate of the first point in the line, and then the x and y coordinate of the second point in the line. So it's the start and the end of the line, and then processing will draw a line connecting those two. So similarly, if we pick the random number 3 or 4 or 5, we're still going to draw 2 lines, but they're going to be different lines. And if you look closely, you'll see that those coordinates are a little different. And that's about it. We're going to do that for each cell in the grid. Pick a random number, draw a random shape. Sometimes we actually, you can see we're getting a random number between 0 and 8, but we only go up to 7 in our if statement. So if we get the random number 8, we just won't draw anything at all and leave that grid cell blank. And then the very last thing we do is just save the file. So I'm going to save it in a file called random.png. And if you just go to the sketch menu here at the top and say show sketch folder, then you'll see there is our random.png, our output file. And this output file is almost ready to send to the WOVNS platform. It's got the right colors and the right dimensions. We just need to index it. And so what you'll want to do is go back to the WOVNS color palettes page for the color palette you're using. You want to download the ACT file, the Adobe Color Table, and you'll use Photoshop to index that PNG to that color table, and then it'll be ready to upload to the WOVNS platform. So there you go. There's your first program. Generates this cool design right there. This cool design, and it's also a great place for getting started with experimenting. So what you can do is use that same basic structure of kind of a grid and drawing a random shape in each grid, but do different things. So if I open up the random grid 2 example, you can see it's got a very similar setup. It's got very similar loops to loop through each cell in my grid. Kind of same idea, pick a random number, do different things depending on what random number we picked. But if I run that example, you'll see that I get a totally different pattern. And so what you can do is play with, what shapes you draw, what colors you use, and if you want to know more possibilities, just go to the Help menu and Reference, and you'll get the processing reference, which tells you about all these different kinds of shapes and commands you can use to draw lots of different things. Yeah, now you've basically learned everything you need to know to use code and processing to generate cool designs like this. And we're really excited. We hope you guys go out and experiment, and we can't wait to see what you come up with.
Yeah, so thanks so much for joining us and helping to break it down a little further.
Yeah, no problem.